Welcome to Tech Notice. So the 12th gen has been out for a few months now, and it's time to check how the improvements have gone on Windows 11. So I did my Premiere Pro timeline test earlier on Windows 10, like right in the beginning where 12th gen was launched. At that point, Windows 10 was faster than Windows 11, but now things have improved. Lots of BIOS updates, Windows updates, software updates, and now the system is actually faster on Windows 11 than it was previously. So in this video, what I want to do is actually show you the performance of a absolutely balls to the wall system over here. Let's see if anything has been improved and how much it's been improved since the 12th gen launch, right after this.
Artgrid is an online stock footage platform that offers the highest quality stock video from HD to 8K, ProRes, LOG, and RAW formats. Active subscription provides you access to unlimited downloads and a royalty-free worldwide license. The license doesn't expire even when the subscription has been cancelled. Artgrid catalog is updated daily and the subscription can be configured to fit your needs. Get 2 months for free when joining Artgrid through the links in the description below.
So what I have updated is I have the latest BIOS over here for the Z690 ProArt system. I'm going to leave all the links in the description below and the build video if you want to check it out. It's absolutely amazing build, super quiet, super powerful, everything super. So the BIOS version is 0811. I just updated that one. We are running 64 gigabytes of DDR5 and it's running at 4800 megahertz. Now the system is not stable at 4800, but I'm still going to go ahead and see if it works with this one. If it doesn't, we're going to drop it down to 4000 megahertz. We've got the latest studio driver for the RTX3090. And then our Premiere Pro over here is the version 22.1.2. Now, talking about Premiere Pro, one of the other important things is to know which codecs are hardware supported. So basically by the Intel chip or the NVIDIA graphics cards over here. And Puget Systems have tested this, and we've got this great chart over here that really shows you like which codecs are hardware accelerated on which like chips, whether Intel QuickSync or NVIDIA RTX cards. So as you can see, if you look at the H.264, then it's all the same. Only 8-bit 420 has been hardware accelerated, but the H.265 is a few more things. So on the NVIDIA encoders, the 8-bit 420 and 10-bit 420 is hardware accelerated. But if we move on to 11th gen and 12th gen with the new iGPUs inside, there is also 10-bit 422 supported over here. And if you are a Premiere Pro user, it's quite a sad look to see, because if you look at DaVinci Resolve, H.265, every single codec is hardware accelerated and more on the NVIDIA side. So it's a little bit sad, but it's still good to see that 10-bit 422 is now hardware accelerated on the Intel iGPU. So, you know, Adobe, please, let's get all of those H.265 codecs accelerated on this system. Another thing we're going to watch in the end of the video is to see what's the like average power consumption and maximum like CPU temperatures and GPU temperatures to see if our system is running perfectly. So the first clip over here, I'm going to press play, is 8-bit 420 60 frames per second, and as you can see, this is on the iGPU. I'm going to put this to, so as you can see, the video decode 1 is using one of those decoders inside the CPU or iGPU to actually play this back. So there's absolutely no problem playing this back at 60 frames per second, and timeline performance is buttery smooth. Now let's add the color grade and let's see if it's any different. Absolutely exactly the same. And if you're wondering how does this split to, is if the actual video codec is hardware accelerated by the iGPU, then the iGPU plays back the video, but then the NVIDIA graphics card plays back the actual graphics effects, like this Lumetri color clip over here, which we have on the top over there. This is played back by the graphics card over here, as you can see, the 3D. So if we press play, you can see that the GPU is doing some work over here, and then Intel is playing this back. Not too much of our system is being used over here. Okay, moving on to 10-bit 420. So this is 24 frames per second. Pressing play. This should still accelerated on the iGPU, but now we're using the second encoder on the iGPU. Timeline performance, super easy, 0 frames dropped. We're gonna put the color grade on as well. Absolutely buttery smooth, don't need to worry about that. By the way, every single timeline on this Premiere Pro test project is the native timeline for the codec. So if it's 4K, it's 4K. If it's 6K, it's 6K. If it's, you know, it has the native timeline resolution. On DaVinci Resolve test, it's a little bit different. If you're a DaVinci Resolve editor, just stay tuned for that. It's gonna come out as well because I wanna do this on DaVinci Resolve as well. But basically in there it's different because you choose the timeline resolution and then that's just that resolution, and then the video codecs can be like 6K but it still plays back it at 4K or so on. So it's a little bit different. So Premiere Pro just plays everything back at full fat. That's why you might see a little bit of a less performance sometimes. But if you put them like side to side with the same specs, they play back like in my opinion pretty similarly. Very easy to play back. This is 422 H.264, so this is purely on CPU, and as you can see, look, I'll leave this on CPU so you can see, but even the timeline performance is just very good. Like, wow, okay, very good. I'm gonna press play. You can see it's been played back on the CPU on some of those cores. Zero frames dropped, so even 422 10-bit, no problem at all. Now this over here is 422 10-bit 25 frames per second, and this is normal H.264. And then on the other here is XAV-SI from A7S III, which is All-Intra codec, which is much easier to play back. It's got a much bigger bit rate, but as you can see, the timeline performance is very easy. Both of them are 25 frames per second. But this timeline scrubbing on the SI or All-Intra codec is very easy. And this is just compressed over here, but whoa, they have changed something over here because Premiere Pro is playing this back very easily. This is the smoothest timeline performance I have seen on any of the codecs. Okay, now it's gone a little bit choppy still. But still, this is very smooth. I haven't seen any other system play this back as good. Even the Ryzen 9 5950X wasn't as good as this. And obviously the SI is very smooth. Let's press play as well. Very good. Now this is 10-bit 422 60 frames per second H.264. So we're just testing without the color grade over here, and it's pretty good. This is not hardware accelerated, so this goes all on the CPU. So let's press play. Let's see if it can play it back. So 90 watts pulled from the CPU socket, and then the rest of the system is pulling altogether 250 to 270 watts. So not bad over here, playing this back. 25% used on the CPU. It's like easy, super easy for it. The timeline performance isn't like super great, like buttery smooth, but totally editable. Like clicking around, it goes like instantly. Nothing bad to say. Just feels very good to me. Now this is 10-bit 420 4K, 50 frames per second, and it is H.265. And we've got a color grade on here as well. So this is hardware accelerated, so the iGPU can decode this video. And as you can see, the timeline is super smooth. When we press play, let's have a look. This one video decode is working quite a lot. CPU is doing hardly anything, and then the NVIDIA GPU is just putting the color grade on. So it's absolutely perfect. So if you're using any of the mirrorless camera footage of, you know, H.265, 420, 4K, 60 frames per second, well, this is 50 frames per second here, but even 60 is fine. It's no problem at all. This is Canon R5, H.265, 60 frames per second, 10-bit 422. It's like an absolute nutcracker, and this is like one of the best things that happened with the latest Premiere Pro update, is that they updated this to actually play this back on the hardware, on the iGPU. So Intel systems are playing this back. As you can see, the iGPUs are both, as you can see, the media engines on the iGPU are playing this back. The interesting thing is sometimes it swaps the decoder because there's two engines inside. Have a look at this one. Look, depending on a clip, it plays it back on like one or the other, which is interesting. Look, it's going to swap now again. Yeah, there we go. That's an interesting analysis. I haven't seen that one before, from one encoder to the other, but it's super smooth. Like, we've got color grade on as well, and timeline performance. Oh my word. It's so smooth. Not a problem at all. Let's put this on 50% and let's see. It's absolutely fine. No problem at all playing this back. So it's insane. There isn't a better system out there. I'd love to test the Apple M1 Max on this as well to see how this compares to this, but honestly, this is as good. The only guy who can play this back, could play this back as good, is the M1 Max or M1 Pro systems, because they have these encoders in there as well that are pretty good, but I'm not sure if they're as good as this 12900k over there. So this is Canon C200 RAW, 4K, DCI 4K, 60 frames per second, and let's try full resolution playback. It's very smooth. There's a bit of tearing over there, and that's that really, but it's very smooth. So I'm gonna press play. Let's see if it plays it back. So full resolution, 0 frames dropped, plays it back, no problem. Yikes. The CPU is quite well utilized. Actually now it's 60% utilized. That's interesting. I'm wondering what was going on over there. So at first it was 100% and now it's kind of like jugging around. A little bit of load on it because it's 60% used. Let's put the color grade on as well. So now we should have the NVIDIA kick in a little bit more over here as well. Okay, went from 3 to 7%. Let's start it again. Let's see what's going on here. So plays it back, 0 frames dropped, and if you're using Canon C200 RAW, that's pretty good. So I'm trying to play back 2 of these clips on top of each other, and as you can see, the CPU is now 100%. So basically, we are playing back 120 frames per second, 2 separate 4K clips, and this is RAW. Absolutely fantastic. 0 frames dropped, and look at that. It actually at first puts all the effort in there, and then it figures out that, oh, actually we don't need that much power in there, and this calms down. Absolutely fantastic. Now this is red 4K RAW, and the timeline is, this is quite an easy codec to edit on any of the systems really. Pressing play, 0 frames dropped as always. System's hardly doing anything. It's not sweating at all. It's super fine. Even 2 times speed, it's playing it back and no problem. So I wouldn't worry about anything over here. Now this is 120 frames per second, 420, 8-bit, and as you can see, we are dropping some frames over here because there's a lot to decode and do. So interestingly, now the iGPU is not playing it back because it's realized it's better to play it back on the NVIDIA graphics card, which is interesting because this is actually accelerated on the iGPU of Intel's chip as well, but for some reason Premiere Pro thinks that this is better to do it on the NVIDIA encoders because there's just a lot of power to process 120 frames per second. So this is also 120 frames per second, but this is a 422 10-bit H.264 codec. And this is now played back on the CPU because this is not hardware accelerated. So the CPU is doing all the hard work on the 12900K. And interestingly, look at this now, 0 frames dropped. We're playing back full resolution of this on the CPU and it's not dropping any frames. So as you can see, that really shows how powerful the CPU is, that those encoders can't keep up with this. Look at this, the NVIDIA encoders, let's see, they're dropping frames here on the H.264 420, which is hardware accelerated. As you can see, the CPU is much more powerful. So if you go to the CPU, press play, the CPU will play this back and it doesn't drop any frames. So let's have a look at the timeline performance. Let me zoom in a little bit. So the CPU is a little bit laggy. When you move to the GPU, it's much smoother, and that's where the hardware acceleration really like kind of shows its place where it can do it a bit better, because when we're scrubbing around, we're producing much more frames than on the CPU part over here. It's much choppier, although when pressing play, the actual CPU is able to push through 120 frames, which is just insane how powerful the CPU is. Now these yellow clips are H.265. Now let's press play. This 10-bit H.265 should be encoded on the iGPU, and as you can see it is. But also we are having this NVIDIA graphics card to play back the color grade of this, but we are dropping frames. It's actually 2 frames, so it's not like a constant drop of frames. That's not too bad, playing this back 420. So this now here is 120 frames per second, H.265. 422. So this is now accelerated on the iGPU on the Intel system over here, as you can see. And then the NVIDIA graphics card is playing back the color grade over there. And we are dropping quite a lot of frames over here. Obviously you can't see it because there's 120 frames per second being played back, but you don't notice when there's a few frames missing because there's so many frames per second. Obviously the timeline over here is quite smooth, even with the color grade on. Let's try this one over here. Both of them H.265 codecs are very, very, very like good. I'd say very, very smooth. Smoother than the H.264 actually. Actually exactly the same. I'm not seeing a massive difference over here. Okay, the 420 H.264 is like the fastest over there, even with the color grade on there. The CPU, even the CPU like producing over here, it's like hundreds and hundreds of frames per second where I'm scrubbing through all this. But H.265 is like very, very smooth. It's awesome to see that because this high efficiency codec is actually able to grab a lot of data from the camera, keep the file sizes small, and now even hardware acceleration on our systems can play this back smoother than H.264. So it's absolutely awesome. Now let's move the resolution and pump it up to 5K and let's see how we're doing. So this is red 5K. I'm gonna press play and let's see how we are doing. The CPU is 100% utilized, trying to play this back. And we're actually playing this back, which is very, very interesting. Previously, I think this is the point where the Intel 12900K started to struggle with the previous updates, but look, now we're managed to play back 0 frames dropped, all of this over here. So I'm happy to see that. This is definitely being improved since the beginning. I'm happy to see that because above 4K really, earlier tests showed that it just couldn't do that. Now this is red 6K. Let's see if this is improved at all. So timeline is quite, it's all right, not too bad. I'm gonna put the color grade on as well to see how this is. Timeline performance is, it's okay. To be honest, it's not as good as the Ryzen 9 5900X. The 12-core monster was much better at playing back like the red 6K RAW or so on. Intel just isn't quite as good doing that. So let's press play with the color grade and let's see what happens. Okay, we're playing back this now. Okay, we're dropping some frames. Yeah, quite a lot of frames over here. And this is like the weakness of this 12900K chip. There's quite not like, I think it's still like a software bug because the CPU, yeah, no. This is the weakness of this chip. We're dropping lots of frames over here and you can't just play this back. This red codec or this high resolution doesn't quite suit well with the Intel one. I guess the 8 performance cores aren't quite enough to play this back, whereas the 12 performance cores on the 5900X, just have a look at that timeline performance on my channel, that was much, much, much better. Even without the color grade, the results are pretty much, yeah, they're exactly the same. The CPU is like 100% utilized over here. Yep. 6K Red RAW, not so good for this 12900K. Moving on to BRAW, okay, so I'm gonna put the color grade on straight away because that's very commonly used codec over here with Blackmagic, you know, shooters. Like this one is the Blackmagic 6K as well for me. It's very easy codec to work with. As you can see, timeline is buttery smooth. This is one clip. This is two Blackmagic RAWs on top of each other. And as you can see, no problem over here. Let's press play. Let's see if it can play this back 0 frames dropped or not. As you can see, CPU is about 34% utilized. You know, we're playing back some of the color grade over there as well. Okay, a few frames dropped over there, but I think this is just a little bit of a buggy. I don't think the Intel chip really likes the raw codecs. It's a little bit harder. As soon as it goes raw, it's like much more struggling. But actually, look, second attempt, no problem, playing it back, full flat speeds. Now this is 3 6K BRAWs on top of each other. About 50% utilized now on the CPU. Let's see, 0 frames dropped. Let's see if we're gonna keep this going like that as well. Between those two clips it dropped a few frames, but now it didn't. So I'd say the BRAW 6K is completely fine, and if it's 4K BRAW, no problem as well. It drops an odd frame here and there, but I'd say generally fine. Now this is Canon R5 8K footage, and it's 30 frames per second, full resolution with color grades, and so this is full resolution with color grade, and as you can see, we have a slideshow, quite a big of a slideshow, and we're using, look at this RAM, 50 gigs of DDR5 used, and to be honest, this is the most frames I've seen any system produce when playing this back at full resolution. It's like amazing, actually. I think this is to do with the DDR5. But now when we put it to half the resolution, let's press play, let's see what happens. Look at that. Perfect. No problem at all. CPU is 100% utilized, but it is actually able to play this back. We're dropping an odd frame here and there, but look at that. To my eye, this looks perfect. And we've got a color grade on as well. So even this 8K RAW footage, I am seriously impressed, actually. Like even the Ryzen 9 5950X wasn't quite able to play this back as well as this one over here. So now this is red 8K, and we're gonna try to play this back at full resolution, and it looks like it's doing it. The CPU is 100% utilized. Okay, our Premiere Pro crashed. It might not be the Premiere Pro's fault, but my RAM configuration as well, because actually officially 4 RAM sticks at 4800 megahertz aren't supported. You know, with XMB profiles, but I'm trying to get this still to work, so let's see if we can still get it to work. Full resolution, let's play. Look at that. It is just playing it back. Okay, the sharks, we're dropping 1 frame, we've dropped 1 frame, but this is amazing. To play back full fat 8K resolution like this with a color grade, Red RAW, it's pretty amazing. And this is like a consumer chip, and this is a consumer like CPU. It's not like Threadripper Pro or these HEDT or these high-end CPUs that have like, you know, 24 cores, 32 cores, 64 cores, or 48 cores or something like that. So super impressed by this. Full resolution, even timeline performance is very, very good. But most likely what you're going to be doing is playing this back at half the resolution or something like that. And then now it's like very, very smooth. I've got no issues with that. Plays back much better than any of the mirrorless camera codecs you have over here. Pretty much as fast as I'm moving my mouse, it plays it back. So I'm super happy to see that. No problem at all. Okay, might as well try 12K full fat. Let's see what's going to happen. CPU 100% utilized. Check this memory gain now. Look how we're gonna go higher, come on. 27, 28, 30 soon. 30 gigs used. We're putting a lot of this on RAM. Let's see. It's still like the most I have ever seen any of the systems play it back. Still not good actually. Okay, finally. Once it's like puts everything on RAM, it's able to play it back, but then look at this, we're like 36 gigabytes used. So timeline performance on full resolution is okay, but who edits 12K at full resolution? Put it at like quarter of the resolution and you still have like about 4K left, and look, you're scrubbing through no problem. I think it's gonna be fine on even half the resolution. It's a little bit more choppy, but let's press play. Let's see if we can do this at half resolution. Yeah, look at that, no problem. Okay, we dropped 8 frames, 20 frames. Actually, still dropping frames even at half the resolution. It just doesn't like RAW. So, what's the conclusion then? In my opinion, a lot of the things have been improved since the beginning, since like doing the test like right early days with DDR5 and so on, even though I think I was even able to test it with 5200 megahertz than with earlier bio versions. But still now, even this 4800 megahertz, a lot of things have been changed and improved, especially mirrorless camera codec like playback and so on. Even 5K RAW worked really well. Previously that was already choppy. 6K RAW, it's still like where this chip doesn't quite like it, and the Ryzen chips are much better. And even at 8K RAW, when it's red codecs, I think AMD does a much better job in there. This Intel chip doesn't quite play this back as good red cameras, but AMD is better at that. But generally, I do think this 12600K is a little bit of a better option, just because you get a lot more features, and then the iGPU can really help you with some of the exporting and so on. So I think I would choose this one over 5950X unless your workflow involves a lot of RAW codecs. If you're working with mirrorless camera codecs, I think this one does a much better job than the Ryzen chips. Let's also have a look at now the like power consumption and so on. So as you can see, my maximum CPU temperature, probably when we were 100% utilized, it peaked at 84°C, and this has been running now for 43 minutes, and my average has been 45°C. Minimum or current temperature is 33°C, so very, very, nice. We're idling here at the moment at 17 watts, which is pretty good. The minimum was 10 watts, but that the maximum we pulled from the socket was 195 watts, which you think, whoa, it's so much more than Ryzen chips. But if you look at the average, we're averaging about 58 watts, which is much lower than the Ryzen chips over there. So if you're wanting like a more energy efficient CPU, then this Intel 12th gen is actually much more energy efficient. Let's have a look at the GPU over here as well. Max temp 60°C, maximum power wattage 251 watts pulled, and so this is absolutely fine. Totally expected from the 3090. I'm happy to see that. So I'm happy to see that this performance has been actually improved, and even though getting some crashes on Adobe Premiere Pro, I think this was due to our RAM configuration, it's working really well. So if you want me to include any future codecs, let me know in the comment section below. Likes if you enjoyed it, subs if you'd like to see more, and I'll meet you in the comment section below. If you've made it to this part of the video, I highly recommend you check out this actual build video, because we had great fun building this, and this is probably the fanciest PC I've built in a lot of ways for creators. I think this is amazing. Bye bye.